The wind cuts across Montauk Point with a peculiar insistence, carrying the salt spray of the Atlantic inland, where it meets something unexpected. Not the quaint fishing villages or pristine beaches that dot most of Long Island's eastern tip, but a landscape that feels fundamentally wrong. Massive concrete bunkers emerge from the earth like broken teeth, their walls, thick enough to withstand direct artillery strikes, now crumbling under decades of coastal weather and determined vegetation. Rust bleeds down from iron doors that no longer close properly. Windows that once offered strategic views of the ocean now frame only darkness and the tangled growth of wild Rosa rugosa that has claimed the interior spaces. At the heart of this decaying military installation stands the radar tower. Even in its abandoned state, the structure dominates the skyline, a monolithic reminder of Cold War vigilance that has taken on an entirely different meaning in the decades since the base officially closed. The IN/FEPS-118 radar system, once America's eyes watching for Soviet bombers approaching from across the Atlantic, now stands silent. Its massive dish, designed to detect threats hundreds of miles away, points uselessly at the sky. Locals call it the Montauk Monster, though not for the same reasons they use that name for the strange creature that washed ashore in 2008. This monster is concrete and steel, and the conspiracy theorists who make pilgrimages here believe it once saw things far stranger than enemy aircraft. This is Camp Hero, and if you believe the stories that have circulated since the 1980s, the radar tower was never just about detecting planes. According to an elaborate web of testimony, leaked documents of questionable authenticity, and claims that strain credulity to its breaking point, this decommissioned Air Force station served as the staging ground for the most ambitious and disturbing secret experiments ever conducted on American soil. Mind control, time travel, psychological warfare programs that turned human beings into weapons. Doorways to other dimensions opened beneath the sand and scrub pine of Long Island's most isolated point. Welcome to the Montauk Project, America's most elaborate and enduring conspiracy theory, a story so rich with dark possibility that it would eventually inspire one of the most successful science fiction series of the streaming age. But before 11 opened portals with her mind, and before the Upside Down became part of popular culture, there was Montauk. And the question that continues to haunt researchers, skeptics, and believers alike: where does the documented history of Cold War military experimentation and pure fiction begin? That question is harder to answer than it might seem, because Camp Hero's real history is strange enough without embellishment. The bluffs of Montauk Point have hosted military fortifications since the Spanish-American War. During World War II, the site bristled with coastal defense guns, their barrels trained on an ocean where German U-boats actually prowled, close enough to sink merchant vessels within sight of Long Island beaches. The concrete bunkers that now attract urban explorers and ghost hunters once served a genuine defensive purpose. When the Cold War transformed America's strategic priorities, Camp Hero evolved with them, becoming part of the SAGE system, the semi-automatic ground environment that formed America's first line of defense against Soviet nuclear bombers. None of this is conspiracy theory. It's documented historical fact, complete with military records, veteran testimony, and the physical infrastructure that still exists. The transition from legitimate military installation to conspiracy ground zero begins in 1983, when a man named Preston Nichols published the first account of what he claimed really happened beneath Camp Hero during the 1970s and early 80s. Nichols, who described himself as a recovered victim of the experiments, laid out a story of breathtaking scope. According to his account, the Montauk Project was a continuation of the infamous Philadelphia experiment, itself a controversial legend involving a naval destroyer, experimental invisibility technology, and sailors supposedly fused into the ship's bulkheads. Nichols claimed that scientists working in vast underground facilities beneath the base had perfected technologies that mainstream physics insisted were impossible. They had built a time tunnel, a stable wormhole that allowed physical travel to different eras. They had developed mind control techniques that went far beyond the documented horrors of MKULTRA, the CIA program that really did dose unwitting subjects with LSD and conduct brutal psychological experiments during the Cold War. At Montauk, Nichols insisted, researchers had learned to amplify psychic abilities, to weaponize human consciousness itself. Young men, often runaways and drifters who wouldn't be missed, were subjected to electromagnetic manipulation that enhanced their latent telepathic and telekinetic powers. The claims grew more elaborate with each telling. Nichols and his collaborator, Peter Moon, eventually published a series of books detailing experiments in age regression, trips to Mars, encounters with extraterrestrials, and the creation of physical objects materialized from pure thought. At the center of it all was something called the Montauk chair, a device where a psychically gifted individual could sit while his thoughts were amplified and broadcast, potentially affecting reality itself or opening portals to other times and dimension. It reads like science fiction because, skeptics argue, it is science fiction. Investigators have found no credible evidence for underground laboratories, no missing persons reports that align with the claimed abductions, no paper trail of funding for programs that would have required enormous resources. The official records show that Camp Hero was deactivated in 1969, placed on standby status, and finally closed in 1981 when the property was turned over to New York State to become a park. The radar tower that conspiracy theorists insist secretly remained operational was, according to the Air Force, simply too expensive to demolish and was left standing as a landmark. Yet, the story persists and grows, absorbing new details, attracting believers who visit Montauk Point expecting to feel residual energies or witness unexplained phenomena. Some report electronic equipment malfunctioning near certain bunkers. Others describe feelings of intense unease or missing time while exploring the grounds. These subjective experiences, difficult to verify or disprove, become part of the legend, self-reinforcing evidence for those already inclined to believe. What gives the Montauk Project its enduring power is not the outlandish claims, but rather the factual anchors that keep it tethered to historical reality. The base really existed. The government really did conduct mind control experiments during this era. MKULTRA really happened, and when those files were declassified, they revealed abuses that seemed unthinkable for a democratic government. If the CIA dosed American citizens with psychedelic drugs without consent, if researchers really studied techniques for breaking human consciousness, then is it so impossible that other programs went even further? This is the uncomfortable space the Montauk Project occupies, the blurred boundary between documented conspiracy and imaginative elaboration. It's a space worth exploring, not because the more fantastic claims are likely true, but because of what the story reveals about power, secrecy, and the relationship between citizens and their government in the national security state. Camp Hero today is both a real place and a metaphor, its crumbling bunkers and silent radar tower standing as monuments to Cold War paranoia that has transformed into a different kind of anxiety. The fear is no longer about Soviet bombers, but about what our own institutions might be capable of when they operate beyond public oversight. In the spring of 1992, an electrical engineer named Preston Nichols sat down with author Peter Moon and began to tell a story that would become the foundation of one of the most elaborate conspiracy theories in American history. What made Preston's account different from other alleged whistleblowers was not just the fantastic nature of his claims, but the way those claims came to him. He did not present himself as someone who had knowingly participated in secret government experiments and later decided to come forward. Instead, Preston described something far more unsettling. He claimed that his memories of working on the Montauk Project had been deliberately suppressed, buried deep in his mind through sophisticated psychological conditioning, only to resurface years later through a complex and controversial process of memory recovery. Preston Nichols was born on Long Island, and by all accounts, he possessed genuine credentials in the field of electrical engineering and electronics. He had studied at various technical institutions and had worked professionally with radio frequency equipment, radar systems, and electronic instrumentation. His background was real and verifiable, which lent a certain technical authority to the extraordinary claims he would later make. Throughout the 1970s and into the 1980s, Preston worked as an independent contractor and consultant, dealing with various electronic systems and radio technologies. He was, by the accounts of those who knew him professionally, knowledgeable and skilled in his field. This technical foundation would become crucial to how his story was received, because when Preston began to describe the alleged technology used in the Montauk Project, he did so with the language and confidence of someone who understood electronics deeply. The story of how Preston's memories allegedly began to surface is itself remarkable. According to his account, throughout the 1980s, he experienced strange gaps in his memory, periods of lost time he could not account for, and disturbing dreams that felt more like fragmented recollections than ordinary nightmares. He described feeling drawn to the abandoned Camp Hero facility at Montauk Point, compelled to visit the site repeatedly without fully understanding why. The massive radar tower that still stood there seemed to trigger something in him, a sense of profound recognition mixed with inexplicable anxiety. Preston claimed that he began working with various techniques to try to understand these troubling gaps in his memory. He explored meditation, sought out practitioners who specialized in hypnotic regression, and allegedly used technical means as well, including attempts to detect unusual electromagnetic fields that he believed might be affecting his consciousness. Through these various methods, Preston said that memories began to emerge, fragmentary at first, but gradually coalescing into detailed recollections of an entire secret life he had lived without conscious knowledge. The memories that Preston claimed to recover painted a picture of extensive involvement in a clandestine research program based at the Camp Hero facility. He described being recruited in the late 1970s due to his expertise in radio frequency technology and electronic systems. According to Preston, his specific role in the project involved developing and maintaining specialized equipment designed to amplify and manipulate psychic phenomena. This was not metaphysical speculation, he insisted, but applied technology based on principles that conventional science had not yet acknowledged. Preston described in considerable technical detail the equipment he claimed to have worked on. He spoke of modifications to the massive N/FPS-35 radar system that had once been part of Camp Hero's air defense network. According to his account, this radar system, with its distinctive huge antenna, could be modified to broadcast at frequencies that interacted with human consciousness. He claimed the radar could be tuned to transmit at the specific frequency of the Earth's magnetic field, approximately 7.83 Hz, a frequency known to scientists as the Schumann resonance. Preston theorized that broadcasting at this frequency, combined with other technical modifications, created a field that could interface with human thought patterns. But the radar was only one component, according to Preston's increasingly detailed recollections. He described working on what he called psychotronic amplification equipment, devices that could take the naturally occurring psychic abilities of specially gifted individuals and amplify those abilities to extraordinary levels. He spoke of coils wound to precise specifications, of crystals used as focusing elements, of computer systems that could digitize and process thought patterns. Preston claimed that he personally built much of this equipment, working from designs provided by other scientists whose names he either could not or would not reveal. Central to Preston's account was the role of psychically gifted individuals in making the technology work. He described a young man he referred to as Duncan Cameron, whom Preston claimed was the primary psychic used in the Montauk experiment. According to Preston, Duncan would be seated in a specially designed chair surrounded by the amplification equipment. Coils would be positioned around his head, monitoring and amplifying his brainwave patterns. When Duncan concentrated on a particular thought or image, the equipment Preston had built would take that mental energy, amplify it tremendously, and broadcast it through the modified radar system. The results, Preston claimed, were extraordinary and terrifying. He described experiments where Duncan's amplified thoughts could create what Preston called tulpas, thought forms that became temporarily real and tangible. Preston recounted witnessing materialized creatures and objects that existed only because Duncan was thinking them into being. When Duncan's concentration wavered, these thought forms would fade or collapse. Preston spoke of these events with the matter-of-fact tone of an engineer describing test results, which made his accounts all the more striking. But Preston's recovered memories went far beyond psychic amplification. He claimed to remember experiments involving time manipulation, describing a piece of equipment he called the Delta T antenna, which supposedly could create a tunnel through time itself. According to Preston, when Duncan focused his amplified psychic abilities through this equipment, a vortex would form, a literal opening to other times and places. Preston described walking through these time portals, experiencing other eras firsthand, as part of the experimental protocol. He claimed to have memories of traveling to the year 6083, of visiting other times in Earth's past and future, of even briefly experiencing alternate timelines. Preston described the underground facilities at Montauk in vivid detail. He spoke of multiple levels beneath Camp Hero, of laboratories and equipment rooms, of living quarters for project personnel. He described the Delta T equipment housed in a large underground chamber, the psychotronic amplification systems, banks of computers running programs designed to interface with human consciousness. He recalled specific incidents, equipment malfunctions, experiments that went wrong, occasions when thought forms became uncontrollable, or when time portals destabilized. In 1992, Preston collaborated with author and publisher Peter Moon to write the Montauk Project, Experiments in Time. This book would become the foundational text for the entire Montauk legend, establishing the core narrative that countless subsequent accounts would build upon. In writing the book, Preston laid out his technical claims in considerable detail, including diagrams and explanations of the alleged equipment. Peter Moon provided the narrative structure and helped Preston organize his recovered memories into a coherent chronology. The book presented Preston's story seriously, treating his recollections as genuine recovered memories of real events. The publication of the Montauk Project created immediate controversy and fascination. Preston's technical background gave his claims a veneer of credibility that purely anecdotal accounts might lack. Here was someone who could speak knowledgeably about radar systems, radio frequencies, electromagnetic fields, and electronic design. When Preston described the technical specifications of the alleged Montauk equipment, he did so with confidence and detail. This combination of technical authority and extraordinary claims proved compelling to many readers. However, Preston's account also raised significant questions, particularly regarding the nature of recovered memory therapy. By the early 1990s, the practice of using hypnosis and other techniques to recover allegedly suppressed memories had become highly controversial in psychological and legal circles. Research was beginning to demonstrate that memory is far more malleable and suggestible than previously believed, and that techniques meant to recover memories could actually create false memories that felt completely real to the person experiencing them. Critics pointed out that Preston's memories had not been continuous, but had emerged through processes known to potentially create false recollections. The scientific community remained deeply skeptical of Preston's claims, both regarding the recovered memories and the alleged technology. The idea that psychic abilities could be amplified through electronic equipment contradicted fundamental principles of physics and neuroscience. No evidence existed that consciousness could interact with electromagnetic fields in the ways Preston described. The concept of creating stable, traversable portals through time violated everything physics understood about causality and the nature of space-time. Yet, Preston maintained his story consistently over the years. He gave lectures and interviews, wrote additional books expanding on his claims, and always spoke with the conviction of someone recounting genuine experiences. Whether Preston truly believed he had recovered authentic suppressed memories, whether he had experienced something that he interpreted through the framework of Montauk mythology, or whether there were other explanations for his detailed accounts, remains a matter of debate and interpretation. What cannot be disputed is the enormous influence Preston Nichols had on the development of the Montauk legend. His combination of technical credibility and specific, detailed claims gave the story a foundation that subsequent authors and researchers would build upon for decades. Preston presented himself not as a believer in conspiracy theories, but as a witness, someone who had been there, who had done the work, who had recovered the memories of what he experienced. His voice, whether revealing hidden truth or conveying sincerely believed false memories, became the voice of the Montauk Project itself in the popular imagination. In the early 1990s, a gray-haired man in his 60s began appearing at UFO conferences and conspiracy gatherings across America, telling a story so elaborate and interconnected that it would fundamentally transform the Montauk legend from a strange local rumor into something far more ambitious. His name was Bielek, and he claimed to remember 2 complete lifetimes. In one, he had been born Alfred Bielek in 1927. In the other, earlier existence, he had lived as Duncan Cameron, brother to another time traveler named Preston Nichols, and together they had served as the human anchors for the most classified experiments in American history. The story Bielek told didn't start at Camp Hero. It started 4 decades earlier, on a destroyer escort called the USS Eldridge, docked at the Philadelphia Naval Shipyard in the autumn of 1943. According to Bielek, he had been there aboard that ship when the Navy attempted something that would tear holes in the fabric of reality itself. The Philadelphia experiment, as it came to be known, had existed as an urban legend long before Bielek claimed personal involvement. The basic story suggested that the Navy had attempted to make a warship invisible to radar using powerful electromagnetic fields. But what happened, witnesses supposedly claimed, went far beyond invisibility. The ship had vanished entirely from the Philadelphia shipyard, teleported instantaneously to Norfolk, Virginia, before reappearing minutes later. Sailors were found fused into the metal bulkheads, driven mad, or missing altogether. The official Navy position had always been straightforward and dismissive. No such experiment ever occurred. The USS Eldridge wasn't even in Philadelphia at the time. But Bielek insisted otherwise. He claimed to have been there, to have experienced the horror firsthand. What made Bielek's account different from earlier Philadelphia experiment stories was the bridge he constructed between that 1943 event and what happened at Montauk 4 decades later. He described standing on the deck of the Eldridge as the generators powered up, feeling the air itself begin to vibrate with an electric charge that made his skin crawl. The ship, he said, became surrounded by a greenish fog, a manifestation of the electromagnetic field being generated. Then the world lurched sideways in a way that defied description, and suddenly the ship wasn't in Philadelphia anymore. But here's where Bielek's narrative took its most dramatic turn. He claimed that he and his brother Duncan jumped off the ship during this displacement event, leaping into the unknown rather than face what was happening to the crew around them. They didn't land in the water. They fell through time itself, tumbling through a vortex that deposited them 40 years into the future, emerging at Camp Hero in Montauk in the year 1983. The precision of this date wasn't accidental in Bielek's telling. He insisted that the Montauk Project had been specifically designed to create a temporal link with the Philadelphia experiment. The scientists at Montauk, he claimed, had detected the time vortex created by the Eldridge and had positioned their equipment to lock onto it, creating a stable tunnel through time connecting August 20, 1943 to August 12, 1983, exactly 40 years later. At Montauk, Bielek said, he and his brother were not treated as anomalies or accidents. They were expected. The project directors already knew about the Philadelphia experiment because they had engineered the Montauk equipment specifically to interface with it. This created a paradox that Bielek seemed to relish in his presentations. How could the Montauk scientists in the 1980s know about a time tunnel before it was created unless they had already established it? The answer, he suggested, was that time didn't work the way we thought it did. The tunnel existed in both directions simultaneously once it was created, making causality itself a kind of loop. According to Bielek, after arriving at Montauk in 1983, he and Duncan became subjects in the ongoing experiments. But their role went beyond that of mere guinea pigs. Duncan Cameron, Bielek claimed, was the psychic who sat in the Montauk chair, the piece of technology central to all the wildest claims about the project. This chair, he described in meticulous detail, wasn't simply a seat. It was an interface device, built with technology that combined human components with alien artifacts, recovered from a crashed spacecraft. The chair itself, in Bielek's telling, resembled something between a dentist's chair and an electric chair, with a helmet or hood that descended over the occupant's head. This helmet contained sensors that could read brainwave patterns and electromagnetic coils that could amplify psychic energy. When Duncan sat in the chair and concentrated, Bielek said, his thoughts could be amplified millions of times over, broadcast through the massive radio antennas at Camp Hero, and made manifest as physical reality. Think about what this claim suggested. Not virtual reality or holographic projection, but actual materialization of thought. If Duncan imagined a monster, that creature would appear in the woods surrounding the base, solid and real and dangerous. If he envisioned a door to another time, that portal would open, stable enough to send people and equipment through. The implications were staggering, and Bielek understood exactly how to present them for maximum impact. He described the underground facilities beneath Camp Hero in extraordinary detail. There were multiple levels, he said, descending deep into the earth. The first level contained conventional laboratories and control rooms. The second level housed the temporal equipment, massive machines that hummed with barely controlled energy. The third level went deeper into stranger territory, areas where the walls themselves seemed uncertain, where reality became flexible because of the constant temporal experiments occurring overhead. And then, there were the tunnels. Bielek claimed that an extensive network of passages connected Camp Hero to other locations across Long Island and beyond. Some of these tunnels were physical, bored through rock by conventional means. Others were different, dimensional shortcuts that existed because of the time technology. You could step into a corridor at Montauk and emerge miles away in moments, space itself compressed by the same forces that compress time. These tunnels, he said, connected to other secret facilities, creating a hidden infrastructure beneath the surface of Long Island. There were exits at the Brookhaven National Laboratory. There were connections to underground installations in the Pine Barrens. Some tunnels, he suggested with dramatic pauses during his lectures, went even farther, possibly connecting to the deep underground bases that other conspiracy researchers claimed existed beneath major cities. As Bielek continued speaking at conferences through the 1990s, his story expanded with new details and connections. He began describing missions through time, journeys to different eras that he claimed to remember with increasing clarity. He had been to the year 6200, he said, to a devastated future Earth, where the surface was ruined and humanity survived in underground cities. He had visited the 1940s, sent back to observe key moments in history. He had even, in some versions of his story, traveled to parallel timelines, alternate versions of Earth where history had gone differently. The technology he described became increasingly elaborate. There were time locks, he explained, devices that could anchor someone to a particular timeline so they wouldn't be erased if the past changed. There were temporal beacons that travelers carried to help them navigate the time stream. There were protocols for avoiding paradoxes, rules enforced by the project directors who understood the delicate nature of causality. Bielek maintained an internal consistency across his many appearances that impressed even skeptics. When asked about specific details years apart, his answers generally aligned. The dates matched. The names stayed the same. He had clearly developed a comprehensive mental model of the timeline he described, with the Philadelphia experiment at one anchor point, the Montauk Project at the other, and 40 years of secret history stretched between them. He explained his recovered memories through a concept he called programming lockouts. After being used in the Montauk experiments, he claimed he and others had their memories suppressed through advanced techniques, then given false identities and inserted back into normal society. Bielek had lived an ordinary life for decades, unaware of his true past as Duncan Cameron, until certain triggers in the 1980s began breaking down the memory barriers. A chance encounter with information about the Philadelphia experiment started the cascade, and suddenly he began remembering a life he hadn't known he'd lived. This element of recovered memory added another layer to the mythology. It suggested that dozens or hundreds of people could be walking around with suppressed memories of Montauk, former participants living normal lives, unaware of the extraordinary experiences locked in their subconscious minds. Any anomalous memory, any strange dream, could potentially be evidence of involvement in the project. Bielek also introduced the concept of timeline editing. The projects, he claimed, weren't just exploring time but actively changing it. Missions were sent to alter events, to nudge history in preferred directions. This meant that the world we lived in might already be a modified version of the original timeline. Perhaps the Philadelphia experiment had never happened in the original history. Perhaps Montauk itself was a retroactive addition, inserted into the past from some future vantage point. The circular logic was dizzying, but it served a purpose. It made the entire narrative unfalsifiable. Any lack of evidence could be explained by timeline alterations. Any contradictions could be dismissed as artifacts of living in a modified reality. The story had become a closed loop, self-sustaining and immune to conventional debunking. What Bielek accomplished was remarkable from a mythological standpoint. He took a local legend about strange occurrences at an abandoned military base and connected it to one of conspiracy culture's most enduring tales, creating a unified narrative that spanned decades and encompassed everything from invisibility experiments to time travel to reality manipulation. He gave the Montauk legend a history, a lineage, a connection to established conspiracy lore that made it feel more substantial, more real, more significant than it had been before. Among all the conspiracy theories that swirled around Camp Hero and the Montauk Project, none proved more disturbing or culturally persistent than the allegations involving children. The claims that surfaced in the early 1990s painted a picture so dark that even dedicated conspiracy researchers initially struggled to address them. According to multiple individuals who came forward with fragmented memories and traumatic accounts, the abandoned radar facility had served as the site of systematic experimentation on kidnapped children and teenagers, specifically selected for their latent psychic abilities and subjected to mind control procedures that left permanent psychological scars. The origins of these specific allegations can be traced to a small group of men who emerged in the mid-1990s, each claiming to have suppressed memories of childhood experiences at Camp Hero. Unlike the retired military personnel or alleged government workers who spoke of time travel and interdimensional portals, these individuals presented themselves as victims, describing childhoods stolen by clandestine programs that viewed young minds as raw material for psychic warfare experiments. Their testimonies shared disturbing commonalities: memories of being taken from their homes or schools, transported to the underground facilities beneath Montauk, and subjected to procedures designed to enhance and weaponize whatever psychic sensitivity they possessed. Stuart Swerdlow became perhaps the most prominent of these alleged survivors, dedicating much of his adult life to recovering and sharing what he claimed were deliberately suppressed memories of his time as a Montauk subject. According to Swerdlow, he was identified as a suitable candidate at a young age due to his psychic sensitivity and family connections that made his disappearance manageable for the program's handlers. He described a systematic process of psychological breaking and rebuilding, sessions in electromagnetic chambers that felt like they were tearing his consciousness apart, and training exercises designed to develop abilities he did not understand and could not control. Swerdlow's accounts painted a picture of a facility that operated with clinical efficiency beneath its surface of abandonment. He recalled white rooms with humming equipment, isolation tanks where children floated in darkness for hours while exposed to electromagnetic frequencies, and staff members who viewed their young subjects with scientific detachment rather than human compassion. According to his fragmented memories, the children selected for the program came from various backgrounds. Some plucked from troubled homes, where their absence might not trigger immediate investigation. Others taken from institutions or foster care systems, where records could be manipulated or disappeared entirely. Other alleged survivors added their voices to this chorus of dark testimony throughout the late 1990s and early 2000s. Preston Nichols, who claimed involvement in the technical aspects of the Montauk Project, spoke of seeing young subjects prepared for experiments, though his accounts focused more on the equipment and procedures than personal experience. Andy Perrow emerged with claims of being trained as a psychic supersoldier from childhood, describing combat scenarios that mixed physical training with mental manipulation. Each individual who came forward brought variations on similar themes: selection in childhood, transportation to underground facilities, exposure to electromagnetic equipment, psychological trauma, and suppressed memories that only surfaced years or decades later. The specific details these alleged survivors shared created a disturbing narrative framework. Multiple individuals described large rooms filled with rows of chairs, each equipped with devices that fit around the head and emitted pulses that seemed to resonate inside the skull. They spoke of being shown images, symbols, and patterns, while in altered states, forced to demonstrate abilities like remote viewing or telepathic communication, while handlers took notes and adjusted equipment settings. Several described isolation as a primary tool, kept in small rooms or sensory deprivation tanks for extended periods, emerging disoriented and more susceptible to suggestion and control. The psychological manipulation allegedly extended beyond the equipment and physical procedures. Accounts frequently mention trauma-based conditioning, deliberately frightening or painful experiences designed to fracture young minds and create dissociative states that could be programmed and controlled. Some claimed they were forced to witness disturbing events or participate in scenarios designed to break down their existing sense of identity and morality. The goal, according to these testimonies, was not merely to enhance psychic abilities, but to create controllable assets who could be activated and directed towards specific targets or objectives. What made these allegations particularly powerful and particularly difficult to address was the genuine psychological distress evident in many of those sharing these memories. Swerdlow and others displayed signs of trauma consistent with severe childhood abuse, even if the specific details of their accounts could not be verified. They spoke with the hesitation and fragmentation characteristic of recovered traumatic memories, struggling to piece together coherent timelines from flashes of imagery and emotional imprints. Mental health professionals who encountered these individuals faced difficult questions about the nature of memory, trauma, and belief. The glaring evidentiary problem with the Montauk Boys' allegations became apparent to anyone who looked beyond the testimonies themselves. Despite claims that dozens or even hundreds of children were taken and used in these experiments over a period of years, no corresponding spike in missing persons reports exists for the Long Island area during the alleged time frame of the 1970s and 80s. No parents came forward claiming their children had vanished without explanation. No school records showed unexplained absences or disappearances. No documentation emerged from hospitals, police departments, or social services indicating a pattern of missing children that might correlate with the alleged program. Researchers attempting to verify these claims encountered consistent dead ends. When they traced the backgrounds of alleged survivors, they found childhoods marked by various forms of documented trauma and instability, but no evidence of the specific abductions and experiments described. Family members, when located and interviewed, typically contradicted the claims, describing troubled childhoods perhaps, but ones that occurred within normal domestic circumstances without mysterious disappearances or returns with altered memories. School records, medical files, and other documentation showed no gaps or anomalies that might support the abduction scenarios. The lack of physical evidence proved equally problematic. Unlike claims about technical equipment or facilities that might have been dismantled and removed, the Montauk Boys' allegations implied a level of ongoing activity that should have left broader traces. Medical professionals pointed out that the types of procedures described, particularly involving electromagnetic equipment and sensory deprivation, would likely have left detectable neurological or physical effects. No such evidence emerged from examinations of those making the claims. Yet dismissing these allegations as pure fabrication failed to address the genuine psychological reality experienced by those sharing them. Mental health professionals recognized patterns in the testimonies that aligned with known phenomena in trauma psychology and memory research. The fragmented nature of the accounts, the mixture of specific sensory details and temporal confusion, the emotional intensity accompanying the recollections, all suggested these individuals were experiencing genuine memories of something traumatic, even if the specific content might not represent literal historical events. The phenomenon of false memory creation, particularly in therapeutic contexts, gained significant attention in the 1990s, coinciding with the emergence of the Montauk Boys' testimony. Research demonstrated that traumatic or unusual memories could be unintentionally suggested or constructed through certain therapeutic techniques, particularly those involving hypnosis, guided visualization, or persistent questioning about suppressed experiences. Some investigators suggested that individuals with actual childhood trauma might have incorporated elements of Montauk conspiracy theories into their memory frameworks, creating hybrid narratives that felt authentic while blending real suffering with imagined scenarios. The cultural context in which these allegations emerged cannot be ignored. The early 1990s saw heightened public awareness and fear regarding child abuse, particularly organized abuse scenarios. The satanic ritual abuse panic had gripped communities across America throughout the late 1980s, with numerous prosecutions based on testimony later shown to involve suggested or fabricated memories. MKULTRA revelations had made government mind control experimentation a proven historical fact rather than paranoid speculation. Popular culture increasingly featured narratives of government conspiracies and hidden programs. Within this environment, allegations of secret child experimentation found receptive audiences, primed to believe the worst about institutional power. The Montauk Boys narrative also tapped into primal fears about child safety and parental protection. The idea that children could be taken not by random predators, but by organized government programs, selected and harvested for their abilities, transformed abstract conspiracy theories into visceral threats to the most vulnerable and precious members of society. Parents listening to these accounts did not need to believe in psychic powers or time travel to feel the horror of imagining children subjected to isolation, manipulation, and trauma by authority figures trusted to protect them. The allegations gained particular traction within communities already predisposed to distrust government institutions. Survivors of documented abuse programs like MKULTRA found the Montauk Boys' claims uncomfortably plausible, representing an extension of proven government willingness to experiment on unwitting subjects. The documented history of radiation experiments on children, syphilis studies on African Americans, and other ethical violations by government agencies established a factual foundation that made even extreme allegations seem possible. Those sharing these accounts found support networks within conspiracy research communities, and among other alleged survivors of government programs. These networks provided validation for experiences that mainstream society dismissed or pathologized, creating alternative frameworks for understanding their memories and trauma. The shared narrative of being selected, used, and discarded by powerful institutions gave meaning to suffering that otherwise seemed random or incomprehensible. The question of why these particular individuals developed these specific memories, whether based on literal events or psychological construction, remains complex and troubling. Their suffering appears genuine even when their accounts cannot be verified. The tension between respecting trauma and pursuing truth created ethical dilemmas for researchers and mental health professionals. How does one address claims that feel authentic to those making them but lack external corroboration? What responsibility exists to investigate allegations involving children, however implausible the details might seem? The Montauk Boys' allegations ultimately represent perhaps the darkest layer of the entire conspiracy theory, transforming abstract claims about technology and physics into human stories of stolen innocence and violated childhood. Whether these accounts represent suppressed historical truth, false memories constructed from trauma and suggestion, or some more complex mixture of experience and interpretation, they touched cultural nerves about power, vulnerability, and the limits of institutional morality that continue to resonate. The truth, as it turns out, is almost as remarkable as the fiction. Long before anyone whispered about time, travel, or mind control, long before the Montauk Project entered popular consciousness, Camp Hero stood as a vital component of America's coastal defense network. The site's documented history begins during the Second World War, when the United States Army recognized Montauk Point's strategic significance. Jutting into the Atlantic at the easternmost tip of Long Island, the location offered unobstructed views across the ocean, making it ideal for monitoring enemy vessels and aircraft approaching the American coastline. Construction began in 1942. The military designated the installation as Fort Hero, naming it after Major General Andrew Hero, Jr., Chief of Coast Artillery during the war. The base was designed as part of the harbor defenses of Long Island Sound and eastern New York, a network of fortifications intended to protect New York City from naval assault. Concrete gun emplacements rose from the bluffs overlooking the sea. Artillery pieces, capable of engaging enemy warships at considerable distances, were positioned along the coastline. Underground bunkers and ammunition storage facilities were carved into the earth beneath the sandy soil. These subterranean structures, the very real tunnels and chambers that honeycombed the ground beneath Camp Hero, were built with thoroughly mundane purposes in mind. They stored shells and powder. They housed electrical systems and communication equipment. They provided shelter for personnel during air raids. They were products of military engineering, designed to withstand bombardment and facilitate the base's defensive mission. Nothing exotic. Nothing sinister. Just functional military architecture designed to protect a vulnerable coastline during a global conflict. The base expanded steadily throughout the war years. Additional buildings appeared across the grounds. Barracks for enlisted men, officers' quarters, mess halls, administrative offices. The facility grew into a small, self-contained military community. Personnel stationed at Fort Hero maintained constant vigilance, scanning the horizon for German U-boats prowling the Atlantic shipping lanes. The threat was genuine. German submarines had indeed penetrated American coastal waters, sinking merchant vessels within sight of shore. Fort Hero represented one link in a defensive chain meant to counter that threat. Then the war ended. Victory in Europe came in May of 1945. Japan surrendered that August. The immediate threat to American shores evaporated. Fort Hero, like countless military installations built hastily during wartime, faced an uncertain future. The guns fell silent. Personnel rotation slowed, then stopped. For a few years, the base existed in a kind of limbo, maintained at minimal readiness while military planners decided its fate. The Cold War provided that fate. As tensions escalated between the United States and the Soviet Union, as the threat of bomber attacks replaced fears of naval bombardment, Fort Hero found new purpose. The United States Air Force assumed control of the facility in 1951, redesignating it as Montauk Air Force Station. The mission shifted from coastal artillery to air defense. The concrete gun emplacements became obsolete overnight, relics of a previous era's warfare. What mattered now was radar. The Air Force invested heavily in transforming the old coastal fort into a sophisticated radar installation. The Strategic Air Command wanted early warning capabilities. They needed to detect Soviet bombers approaching across the Arctic or the Atlantic, needed those precious minutes of advance notice that might mean the difference between effective response and devastating surprise attack. Montauk Point's geography remained its greatest asset. The location still offered clear sightlines across vast stretches of ocean and sky. Engineers constructed a massive radar tower on the base grounds. The structure rose to dominate the landscape, a steel framework supporting sophisticated detection equipment. This was the FPS-35 radar, a powerful long-range surveillance system capable of tracking aircraft hundreds of miles away. The radar became operational in 1960, representing cutting-edge technology for its era. The rotating antenna atop the tower swept continuously across the sky, sending out pulses of radio energy and analyzing the returning echoes for signs of incoming aircraft. The FPS-35 wasn't classified. It wasn't secret. It was a standard component of America's air defense network, one of many such installations positioned around the country's perimeter. Aviation enthusiasts and electronics journals discussed its specifications openly. The radar's presence at Montauk was documented in military records, acknowledged in Air Force publications. Yet decades later, this entirely conventional piece of Cold War technology would become central to extraordinary claims about reality manipulation and consciousness experiments. The radar installation at Montauk fed data into the Semi-Automatic Ground Environment System, known by its acronym SAGE. This was perhaps the most ambitious computer network of its time, a continent-spanning web of radar stations, computer centers, and communication links designed to coordinate America's air defense. SAGE represented a remarkable engineering achievement for the 1950s and 60s. It linked dozens of radar sites across North America, processing their data through massive computer installations, creating a comprehensive picture of air traffic across the continent. At SAGE direction centers, military personnel monitored screens displaying aircraft positions. The system could distinguish between commercial flights, following established routes, and unknown contacts that might represent hostile bombers. It could automatically direct interceptor aircraft toward potential threats, calculate optimal engagement vectors, coordinate responses across multiple bases. For its era, SAGE was revolutionary, a genuine technological marvel that required innovations in computing, communications, and systems integration. Montauk Air Force Station played its assigned role in this network without drama or incident. Personnel reported for duty, monitored their scopes, logged aircraft contacts, performed maintenance on the equipment, and went off duty. Year after year, the radar swept the sky. The routine was tedious but necessary, the eternal watchfulness required by Cold War defensive postures. The Soviet bombers never came. The system worked precisely because it deterred the attacks it was designed to detect. But the Cold War evolved. Intercontinental ballistic missiles replaced bombers as the primary nuclear threat. Satellites provided surveillance capabilities far exceeding ground-based radar. The extensive radar network that had seemed so critical in 1960 became increasingly redundant by 1970. Budget constraints and changing strategic priorities led the Air Force to evaluate which installations remained essential and which had become expensive redundancies. Montauk fell into the latter category. The base's closure was announced in 1980. The radar stopped its ceaseless sweeping in January of 1981. Personnel received new assignments. Equipment was removed or mothballed. The Air Force formally decommissioned the station, transferring the property to the General Services Administration for disposal. The official closure date, documented in Air Force records and local newspaper accounts, was February 12, 1981. This timeline creates an immediate problem for Montauk Project narratives. Most versions of the conspiracy theory place the project's activities between 1971 and 1983, with the most dramatic events occurring in the early 1980s. Yet, the base was officially closed and abandoned before many of these alleged experiments supposedly occurred. The Air Force had left. The property sat empty, awaiting transfer to other government agencies or possible sale. Proponents of the Montauk Project claimed this official closure was itself a cover story, that the public decommissioning merely provided convenient camouflage for secret activities continuing beneath the surface. This explanation is unfalsifiable by design. Any evidence of closure becomes proof of conspiracy. The absence of continued military presence becomes evidence of hidden military presence. Documentation of abandonment becomes documentation of concealment. Yet the real history of the site after 1981 is well documented. The property underwent years of bureaucratic limbo, bouncing between various government agencies. Environmental assessments were conducted. Contamination from decades of military use was identified and eventually remediated. Local activists and preservation groups lobbied for the land to become parkland rather than being sold for development. New York State eventually acquired the property, incorporating it into Camp Hero State Park, which opened to the public in the early 2000s. The underground structures remain, those genuine military tunnels built during World War II. Some have been sealed for safety reasons. Others are accessible to park visitors willing to explore carefully. They're exactly what they appear to be, concrete chambers built to store ammunition and house defensive systems. Their bare walls bear no evidence of exotic equipment or advanced technology. They're damp, moldy, covered with graffiti, littered with debris. They're abandoned military infrastructure slowly returning to nature, no more and no less. The radar tower still stands, a rusting monument to Cold War vigilance. It dominates photographs of the park, its skeletal framework visible for miles. The structure is unsafe to enter. The steel has corroded after decades of exposure to salt air. The radar equipment itself was removed long ago, sold as surplus or scrap. What remains is an empty shell, architecturally interesting but functionally inert. This, then, is the factual foundation beneath the legend. A real military base with genuine underground structures. Actual advanced technology in the form of radar systems that seemed almost magical to outside observers. Legitimate secrecy surrounding military operations during both World War II and the Cold War. A documented history of classified activities, though nothing resembling the Montauk Project claims. And here's where the fertile ground for conspiracy theories reveals itself. The government had indeed conducted secret experiments. This wasn't paranoid fantasy. Declassified documents proved it. Project MKULTRA, the CIA's sprawling mind control research program, operated from the early 1950s through the early 1970s. The program encompassed hundreds of sub-projects, some investigating the effects of LSD and other drugs, others exploring hypnosis, sensory deprivation, psychological torture, and various techniques meant to break down resistance and rebuild personality. MKULTRA was real. The documents are available. Congressional hearings in the 1970s revealed the scope and nature of these experiments. American citizens had been dosed with drugs without their knowledge or consent. Prisoners, mental patients, and others considered vulnerable or expendable had been subjected to invasive procedures. Some subjects suffered lasting psychological damage. At least one death was directly attributable to MKULTRA experiments. The program's existence validated a certain paranoid worldview. The government really had conducted unethical experiments on unwitting subjects. Intelligence agencies really had pursued mind control research. These weren't conspiracy theories. They were documented facts, admitted reluctantly after years of official denial. MKULTRA had predecessors. Project Bluebird, initiated in 1950, investigated interrogation techniques and the potential for controlling human behavior through psychological and chemical means. It was redesignated as Project Artichoke in 1951, continuing similar research with expanded scope. These programs explored whether drugs, hypnosis, or other methods could create amnesia, compel truthfulness, or make subjects perform actions against their will or moral principle. The declassification of these projects fundamentally altered public perception of what the intelligence community might be capable of. If the government had conducted these admitted experiments, what else might they have done that remained classified? If MKULTRA had happened, if authorities had repeatedly lied about its existence before finally acknowledging the truth, what reason existed to trust official denials of other alleged projects? This is the crucial context for understanding how Montauk Project claims gained traction. The legend emerged in a cultural moment when Americans had learned definitively that their government had indeed conducted secret mind control experiments. When the background radiation of genuine conspiracy made fantastic claims seem more plausible. When trust in official statements had been severely eroded by revelations of real misconduct. Camp Hero's abandonment created additional narrative opportunity. The base sat empty for years, decaying and unmaintained. Fences fell into disrepair. Determined trespassers could access the grounds. The site became a magnet for urban explorers, teenagers seeking thrills, and those attracted to abandoned places. They wandered through empty buildings, explored accessible tunnels, photographed the radar tower. They found isolation and atmosphere, perfect ingredients for ghost stories and speculative fiction. Abandoned military facilities breed legends almost automatically. Their liminal spaces, neither fully civilian nor actively military. Their original purposes often remain opaque to visitors who lack technical knowledge. Unfamiliar equipment, mysterious rooms, cryptic signage all invite interpretation and speculation. The imagination fills gaps in understanding with dramatic possibilities. A ventilation shaft becomes an entrance to deeper levels. A concrete pad becomes a launch platform. A standard electrical junction box becomes evidence of exotic power systems. This is how verified history and conspiracy theory intertwined at Montauk. The real radar, the genuine underground chambers, the documented secrecy, and the confirmed existence of other mind control projects all provided plausible elements that lent credibility to implausible claims. The Montauk Project legend succeeded because it was rooted in just enough truth to seem possible. The truth, when it finally emerged, was far worse than most Americans could have imagined. Behind the locked doors of universities, hospitals, and prisons across the nation, the Central Intelligence Agency had been conducting experiments that violated every principle of medical ethics, human dignity, and constitutional law. This was not paranoid speculation. This was not the fevered imagination of conspiracy theorists. This was documented fact, revealed through official government investigations, and confirmed by the agency's own destroyed records. The program was called MKULTRA, and it would become the foundation upon which a generation of conspiracy theories would be built, including the legends of Montauk. To understand why the Montauk Project found such fertile ground in the American imagination, we must first understand the real conspiracy that preceded it. We must understand what the government actually did, what they admitted to, and crucially, what evidence they deliberately destroyed to hide their actions. Because when citizens discovered that their government had been dosing unwitting subjects with LSD, conducting brutal psychological experiments, and lying about it for decades, the question became not whether the government would do such things, but rather, what else might they be hiding? MKULTRA began in 1953, authorized by CIA Director Allen Dulles, in response to fears that communist nations had discovered techniques for mind control. The Cold War was heating up. American prisoners of war in Korea had made seemingly coerced confessions that suggested brainwashing techniques beyond anything the United States possessed. The CIA was terrified of a mind control gap, just as they would later fear a missile gap. And so, with minimal oversight and maximum secrecy, they launched a program that would eventually encompass 149 separate sub-projects, conducted at 80 institutions, including 44 universities and 12 hospitals. The scope was staggering. The ethics were non-existent. Sub-Project 8 focused on LSD, the powerful hallucinogenic drug that became MKULTRA's signature weapon. CIA operatives didn't just study LSD in controlled laboratory settings. They slipped it into the drinks of unwitting bar patrons. They dosed their own colleagues without warning. In one notorious case, Army scientist Frank Olson was given LSD without his knowledge during a work retreat in 1953. 9 days later, he plunged to his death from a New York City hotel window. For 22 years, his family was told it was suicide brought on by work-related stress. Only later did they learn the truth about his unwitting participation in a CIA drug experiment. But LSD was just the beginning. Sub-Project 54 explored whether accurate personality assessments could be conducted using graphology, the analysis of handwriting. Sub-Project 68 tested the effects of various drugs on animals and humans. Sub-Project 73 investigated the potential of electrical shock as a tool for inducing amnesia and controlling behavior. Each sub-project pushed further into ethically questionable territory, testing the boundaries of what could be done to the human mind. The experiments conducted under the umbrella of MKULTRA read like a horror anthology. At McGill University in Montreal, psychiatrist Donald Ewan Cameron conducted experiments funded by MKULTRA Sub-Project 68 that attempted to erase existing memories and reprogram patients with new thoughts. His technique, which he called psychic driving, involved putting patients into drug-induced comas for weeks at a time, then subjecting them to repetitive audio messages played continuously for 16 to 20 hours per day. He combined this with intensive electroshock therapy, administering shocks at 30 to 40 times the power considered safe. These were not volunteers. These were patients who had come to Cameron seeking help for anxiety or depression. They left as broken shells, their memories shattered, their identities fragmented. Many never fully recovered. One woman forgot she had children. Another lost the ability to recognize her husband. The CIA funded this torture, documented it, learned from it, and then tried to bury it. At the Addiction Research Center in Lexington, Kentucky, primarily black inmates were used as test subjects in drug experiments that lasted for months. They were given LSD, then observed for effects. In exchange, they received heroin or morphine, exploiting their addiction to ensure compliance. The experiments ran from 1954 to 1963. The men were never told they were part of CIA research. They were never given the option to refuse. They were simply used, their minds treated as testing grounds for chemical weapons. Sensory deprivation experiments explored how long human consciousness could withstand the absence of external stimuli. Subjects were placed in isolation tanks, floating in darkness and silence, sometimes for days. The goal was to determine if sensory deprivation could make subjects more susceptible to suggestion, more easily controlled. Many subjects experienced hallucinations, panic attacks, and lasting psychological damage. The CIA carefully documented the breaking points, noting which techniques produced the most pliable subjects. Hypnosis research attempted to create programmed assassins, individuals who could be given instructions while in a trance state and then carry out those instructions with no memory of being programmed. The experiments tested whether hypnotized subjects could be made to violate their own moral codes, to commit acts they would normally find abhorrent. While the CIA never confirmed successfully creating a hypnotized assassin, the mere fact that they tried reveals the program's dark ambitions. Sexual blackmail operations were conducted under MKULTRA's umbrella. In Operation Midnight Climax, the CIA set up safe houses in San Francisco and New York, staffing them with prostitutes on the agency payroll. These women would lure men to the apartments, where CIA operatives watched through two-way mirrors while the unsuspecting targets were dosed with LSD and other drugs. The goal was to study sexual behavior under the influence of mind-altering substances and to test whether drugs could be used to extract information during compromising situations. For over 20 years, this vast apparatus of unethical experimentation continued. Thousands of unwitting Americans were subjected to drugs, psychological torture, and experimental procedures. And then, sensing that oversight might finally be coming, CIA Director Richard Helms made a fateful decision. In January of 1973, as Watergate began to unravel and trust in government institutions crumbled, Helms ordered the destruction of all MKULTRA records. This was not routine document disposal. This was deliberate evidence destruction. Thousands of pages documenting 2 decades of experiments were shredded, burned, and obliterated. The goal was to ensure that no one would ever know the full extent of what the CIA had done. But Helms missed some files. Financial records survived, tucked away in a budget office where the destruction order didn't reach. And when the Church Committee began investigating intelligence abuses in 1975, those surviving documents cracked open a door that the CIA had desperately wanted to keep closed forever. The Church Committee, officially known as the United States Senate Select Committee to Study Governmental Operations with Respect to Intelligence Activities, was formed in the wake of Watergate and the exposure of numerous intelligence agency abuses. Led by Senator Frank Church of Idaho, the committee investigated CIA activities with a level of scrutiny the agency had never before faced. And what they found shocked the nation. The hearings revealed MKULTRA's existence to the American public for the first time. Senators questioned CIA officials who admitted to experiments that seemed lifted from dystopian fiction. The American people learned that their government had dosed citizens with LSD, that mentally ill patients had been tortured in the name of research, that prisoners had been used as guinea pigs, that the CIA had explored assassination, mind control, and psychological warfare with American citizens as unwitting test subjects. Perhaps most disturbing was what remained unknown. Because Helms had destroyed the records, the committee could only glimpse fragments of the full program. They knew about 149 subprojects, but had detailed information on only a fraction. They knew thousands had been subjected to experiments but couldn't identify most of the victims. The destruction of evidence meant that the complete truth about MKULTRA would never be known. This incomplete revelation had a profound effect on American consciousness. The government had admitted to monstrous acts, but could conveniently claim that destroyed records prevented full accounting. They had been caught conducting unethical experiments, but insisted those programs had ended. They promised oversight and reform, while acknowledging that the evidence of their crimes had been intentionally destroyed. The message was clear. The government could and would lie. They could and would conduct secret programs that violated constitutional rights. They could and would destroy evidence when exposure threatened. And crucially, they could and would deny everything until irrefutable proof forced admission. When MKULTRA was exposed in the mid-1970s, it fundamentally altered the relationship between American citizens and their government. Conspiracy theories that would have seemed absurd in the 1950s now seemed plausible in the 1980s. After all, if the CIA really had tried to create mind-controlled assassins, if they really had operated secret labs conducting psychological torture, if they really had destroyed evidence to cover their tracks, then what else might they be hiding? This is the crucial context for understanding the Montauk Project claims that emerged in the 1980s. When Preston Nichols and his collaborators began telling stories of government mind control experiments, secret underground bases, and psychological manipulation, they weren't spinning tales from whole cloth. They were extrapolating from established fact. MKULTRA had proven that the government conducted mind control experiments. The destruction of records had proven that evidence could disappear. The Church Committee had proven that only fragments of secret programs might ever be revealed. The Montauk legend built directly on this foundation. It took the proven elements of MKULTRA and expanded them, suggesting that the exposed programs were just the beginning, that even more extreme experiments had continued in deeper secrecy. It's no coincidence that Montauk's stories began circulating within a decade of the Church Committee hearings, at a time when MKULTRA revelations were still fresh in public memory. The believers in Montauk could point to MKULTRA and ask a simple, devastating question. If they admitted to that, what aren't they admitting to? And in the absence of evidence, in the vacuum created by destroyed records and official denials, later proven false, speculation rushed in to fill the void. The government's own actions had created the conditions for theories about even darker secrets to flourish. This is how real conspiracies give birth to alleged ones. The documented horrors of MKULTRA became the foundation for theories about Montauk, Philadelphia experiment time travel, and countless other supposed government programs. And because MKULTRA had been successfully hidden for 2 decades, because records had been destroyed, because officials had lied convincingly until forced to admit the truth, those theories couldn't be easily dismissed. The legacy of MKULTRA is thus twofold. It stands as documented proof of government willingness to conduct unethical experiments on unwitting citizens. And it stands as the foundation upon which a generation of conspiracy theories would be built, each one referencing MKULTRA as evidence that if that was real, anything might be real. The factual conspiracy and the alleged conspiracy became intertwined, each lending credibility to the other, creating a feedback loop that continues to this day. The human brain is a masterful storyteller, constantly weaving fragments of experience, emotion, and suggestion into coherent narratives that feel absolutely real. But sometimes, the stories our minds create are fiction, masquerading as fact, and nowhere has this phenomenon caused more havoc than in the realm of recovered memory. To understand how dozens of people in the 1980s and 90s came to believe they had been victims of elaborate satanic rituals, or how others developed detailed recollections of alien abductions, we must first understand something fundamental about memory itself. It is not a video recording that captures events with perfect fidelity. It is a reconstruction, built anew each time we remember, vulnerable to contamination, suggestion, and the powerful human need to make sense of our experiences. In the early 1980s, a peculiar form of therapy began gaining traction in psychological circles. Practitioners believed that many psychological problems stemmed from repressed memories of childhood trauma, memories so terrible that the conscious mind had locked them away completely. The solution, these therapists proposed, was to help patients recover these hidden memories through hypnosis, guided imagery, dream interpretation, and repeated suggestion. What followed was a cascade of accusations that would tear families apart and send innocent people to prison for crimes that never occurred. Elizabeth Loftus, a cognitive psychologist at the University of California, would become one of the most important voices in understanding what was happening. Through decades of meticulous research, she demonstrated something that seemed to contradict common sense. Memories, even vivid and detailed memories, even memories accompanied by powerful emotions, could be entirely false. In her most famous experiment, Loftus showed research subjects a video of a car accident. Afterward, she asked some participants how fast the cars were going when they smashed into each other, while asking others how fast they were going when they hit each other. That single word change had a measurable effect. Those who heard smashed estimated higher speeds. More remarkably, when questioned a week later, those who had heard smashed were far more likely to report seeing broken glass in the video, even though no broken glass had been present at all. The suggestion embedded in a single word had created a false detail that became integrated into their memory of the event. But this was just the beginning. Loftus went further, demonstrating that entirely fabricated events could be implanted in people's memories. In what became known as the Lost in the Mall study, researchers told participants about 4 childhood events that had supposedly happened to them, based on information from family members. 3 of the events were real. 1, getting lost in a shopping mall, was completely made up. After repeated interviews where participants were encouraged to try to remember the fabricated event, approximately 25% of subjects developed detailed memories of being lost in the mall, complete with descriptions of the person who found them, what they were wearing, and how they felt. These were not vague impressions. They were rich, emotional, specific memories of an event that never occurred. The mechanism behind this phenomenon involves several interconnected aspects of how memory works. The brain does not store experiences as complete, unchangeable files. Instead, it encodes fragments, sensory impressions, emotional states, and contextual details across different neural networks. When we remember something, the brain reconstructs the event by pulling these fragments together, filling gaps with plausible information based on our expectations, later experiences, and external suggestions. This process is called confabulation, and it happens constantly, usually in harmless ways that we never notice. Source monitoring errors represent another critical piece of the puzzle. The brain must determine where information came from. Did we experience it directly, dream it, hear about it, or imagine it? This source monitoring is imperfect, especially when events are discussed repeatedly, when suggestions are introduced, or when imagery exercises are used. Information from external sources, from therapists' questions, from books about abuse, from other patients' stories shared in group therapy, can gradually be misattributed to personal experience. The person is not lying. They genuinely cannot distinguish between memories of real events and memories constructed from suggestion and imagination. In the therapy rooms of the 1980s, these cognitive vulnerabilities met a perfect storm of cultural narratives and flawed therapeutic techniques. The concept of massive repression had gained cultural currency, the idea that our minds protect us from unbearable trauma by hiding it. Therapists often approached patients with the assumption that symptoms like depression, anxiety, or eating disorders were likely signs of hidden abuse. Patients were told they probably had repressed memories. They were encouraged through hypnosis, age regression techniques, and guided imagery to search for these hidden events. In group therapy settings, they heard other patients' recovered memories, providing templates and details that could be unconsciously incorporated into their own emerging narrative. The process was often gradual. It might begin with vague feelings or fragmentary images during a guided visualization exercise. The therapist would interpret these fragments as evidence of real trauma trying to surface. Patients were encouraged to trust these impressions, to elaborate on them, to imagine details. With each session, the memories became more vivid and detailed. Patients would read books about ritual abuse or incest that provided additional details and framework. The memories would expand to include multiple perpetrators, elaborate rituals, even murders of infants. The more the memories were rehearsed and discussed, the more real they became, triggering genuine emotional distress and trauma symptoms. This brings us to one of the most important and difficult aspects of this phenomenon. The people who developed these false memories were genuinely suffering. Their distress was absolutely real. The memories felt real to them in every conceivable way. They experienced nightmares, flashbacks, panic attacks, and profound grief. Many severed relationships with their families, convinced their parents had perpetrated unspeakable acts. The psychological pain was not manufactured or imagined. This is what makes false memories so insidious and so important to understand. Belief in a false memory produces the same emotional and psychological consequences as a real traumatic memory. The satanic panic of the 1980s and early 1990s represents perhaps the most dramatic manifestation of recovered memory therapy gone wrong. Patients in therapy began reporting memories of being forced as children to participate in satanic cults that performed ritual abuse, murdered infants, and engaged in cannibalism. These reports shared remarkable consistency across different patients in different parts of the country, all describing robed figures, inverted crosses, chanting, and forced participation in killing. This consistency seemed to suggest the memories were real. How could so many people in different places describe the same events if they were not true? The answer lies in the circulation of cultural narratives. Books like Michelle Remembers, published in 1980, provided a detailed template of satanic ritual abuse. Therapists read these books and believed they described real phenomena. Patients read them or heard about them. Law enforcement attended seminars about the supposed nationwide conspiracy of satanic cults. The same details appeared in news reports, talk shows, and therapy sessions. When patients were told their vague anxieties might stem from repressed satanic abuse, when they were shown through hypnosis and suggestion how to access these supposed memories, they unconsciously drew on these widely circulated narratives. The consistency was not evidence of reality, but evidence of shared cultural scripts. Despite thousands of allegations, extensive FBI investigations found no evidence of organized satanic cults engaging in ritual abuse. No physical evidence emerged. No bodies were found. Former cult members never came forward. The allegations described vast conspiracies involving hundreds of perpetrators, yet no corroborating evidence ever materialized. What did exist was a therapeutic and cultural environment perfectly designed to generate false memories that felt completely real to those who experienced them. The alien abduction phenomenon followed a strikingly parallel trajectory. Beginning in the 1980s and accelerating through the 1990s, thousands of people came to believe they had been abducted by extraterrestrial beings. These memories typically emerged through hypnotic regression, often conducted by researchers or therapists who already believed in the reality of alien abductions. The process was remarkably similar to recovered memory therapy. People experiencing sleep paralysis, unexplained anxiety, or missing time would seek explanation. Under hypnosis, they would develop detailed memories of being taken aboard spacecraft, subjected to medical examinations, and returned with their memories suppressed. Again, the memories showed striking consistency. Gray aliens with large heads and big eyes. Examination tables. Medical procedures. Hybrid breeding programs. This consistency seemed compelling until researchers recognized that the cultural narrative of alien abduction had been widely disseminated through books, movies, and television. The first widely publicized abduction case, Betty and Barney Hill in 1961, established a template that subsequent abduction memories would follow. Hypnotic regression, with its susceptibility to suggestion and confabulation, combined with cultural narratives and researcher expectations to produce vivid, detailed memories of events that almost certainly never occur. Sleep paralysis likely played a role in many cases. This neurological phenomenon occurs when consciousness returns before the body's muscle paralysis from REM sleep has ended. People experiencing sleep paralysis often report feeling unable to move, sensing a presence in the room, and experiencing hallucinations. In a culture saturated with alien imagery, these terrifying experiences can be interpreted through that lens. When hypnotic regression is then used to recover more details, the brain constructs a coherent narrative around these fragmentary experiences, incorporating cultural expectations and the hypnotist's suggestion. The neuroscience of memory helps explain how these processes unfold at a biological level. The hippocampus encodes new memories and is involved in their consolidation. The prefrontal cortex is crucial for source monitoring and distinguishing real from imagined events. Under hypnosis, these monitoring functions are reduced. The brain becomes more susceptible to suggestion, more likely to generate imagery and narratives without the normal checks that help us distinguish imagination from reality. Stress and arousal, both common in therapy sessions dealing with trauma, enhance memory encoding but also make memories more susceptible to distortion. The amygdala, which processes emotional experiences, becomes highly active, tagging these suggested narratives with powerful emotions that later make them feel authentic. Each time a memory is retrieved, it becomes temporarily unstable, susceptible to modification before being reconsolidated. This means that therapy sessions where memories are repeatedly discussed and elaborated are opportunities for those memories to be altered, expanded, and contaminated with new information. What begins as a vague impression can, through this process of retrieval and reconsolidation, become an elaborate, detailed memory that bears little resemblance to any actual experience. Understanding false memories does not mean denying that real trauma and real abuse occur. They do, with tragic frequency. It does not mean that all recovered memories are false, or that memory is completely unreliable. Most memories, especially of significant events, are reasonably accurate in their broad outline. What this research reveals is that memory is more malleable than most people assume, particularly under conditions of repeated suggestion, hypnosis, and guided imagery. It shows that we must approach claims of recovered memories with appropriate skepticism, while maintaining compassion for those who believe them. The legacy of the recovered memory era includes shattered families, wrongful convictions, and a necessary reckoning within the therapeutic community about harmful practices. Professional organizations developed guidelines warning against suggestive techniques. Courts became more skeptical of testimony based solely on recovered memories. But the fundamental insights about memory remain crucial for understanding not just therapeutic situations, but eyewitness testimony, confessions, and the nature of human consciousness itself. We are all unreliable narrators of our own lives, our brains constantly constructing and reconstructing the stories we tell ourselves about who we are and what we have experienced. Recognizing this fallibility is not a weakness, but a necessary step toward understanding the remarkable and sometimes troubling capacities of the human mind. In the summer of 1983, a story began to circulate that would capture imaginations for decades to come. It contained everything a modern myth needed: shadowy government facilities hidden in plain sight, children subjected to horrific experiments, machines that could bend the fabric of reality itself, and brave whistleblowers willing to risk everything to expose the truth. The Montauk Project narrative didn't just tell a story. It crystallized a very specific moment in American consciousness, a perfect storm of anxiety, distrust, and yearning for something beyond the mundane realities of everyday life. To understand why this particular conspiracy theory proved so enduring, we must first acknowledge what makes any narrative stick in the human mind. The most compelling stories are never entirely new. They remix archetypal elements that resonate deep within our collective unconscious ancient patterns, dressed in contemporary clothing. The Montauk story accomplishes this with remarkable efficiency. The secret military base evokes the forbidden castle of fairy tales, the place where terrible things happen behind walls the common people cannot penetrate. The endangered children tap into our most primal protective instincts. The reality-bending technology serves as our modern version of magic, scientific terminology, replacing arcane incantations, but promising the same impossible transformation. Consider the historical moment when these stories emerged. The early 1980s represented a unique intersection of cultural forces. The Cold War had reached a fever pitch of paranoia, yet the clear moral certainties of earlier decades had begun to crumble. Americans had learned through painful experience that their government did, in fact, conduct unethical experiments on unwitting citizens. Project MKULTRA wasn't speculation or paranoid fantasy. It was documented reality, proven through congressional hearings and declassified documents. The Tuskegee syphilis study had revealed a willingness to sacrifice vulnerable populations in the name of research. Operation Midnight Climax, Operation Northwoods, Coil Pro, the list of verified conspiracies grew longer each year. This validation of institutional distrust created fertile psychological ground. When people learned that the Central Intelligence Agency really had dosed unsuspecting Americans with LSD, when they discovered that the government genuinely had planned false flag operations and conducted radiation experiments on children, the question naturally arose: what else might be true? What other impossible-sounding claims might turn out to be documented fact? The Montauk narrative arrived at precisely the moment when the boundary between paranoid fantasy and documented history had become dangerously porous. The story also synthesized science fiction concepts that had saturated popular culture. Time travel, interdimensional portals, psychic powers, these ideas had migrated from pulp magazines and B-movies into the mainstream consciousness. The Philadelphia experiment legend had already primed audiences to believe in secret military experiments with reality-warping technology. The Montauk story simply took these elements and expanded them, creating a sprawling mythology that could accommodate almost any paranormal claim under its umbrella. It became a narrative framework infinitely expandable, capable of incorporating new elements without losing coherence. But the psychological appeal runs deeper than simple narrative construction. The Montauk story offers something profoundly seductive: special knowledge. In an increasingly complex world where individual agency often seems illusory, where economic and political forces operate far beyond ordinary comprehension, conspiracy theories provide a strange comfort. They suggest that yes, the world is controlled by hidden forces, but you can understand those forces. You can see through the deception. You possess knowledge that the sleeping masses lack. This sense of elevated awareness, of being one of the few who truly understand reality, fulfills deep psychological need. For those who claim direct involvement, the narrative serves additional functions. Many of the key Montauk witnesses describe traumatic childhoods marked by absence, confusion, and unexplained gaps in memory. The Montauk framework provides an explanation for these painful blanks. Instead of ordinary family dysfunction, or the normal fragmentary nature of childhood memory, these gaps become evidence of something extraordinary. The confusion becomes meaningful. The pain serves a purpose. You weren't simply neglected or abused in mundane ways. You were chosen for something significant, targeted because you possessed special abilities that shadowy forces recognized and sought to exploit. This transformation of suffering into significance cannot be overstated as a motivating force. Human beings are meaning-making creatures. We struggle profoundly with randomness, with the possibility that our pain serves no purpose whatsoever. The Montauk narrative, like many conspiracy theories, offers purpose. It transforms victims into survivors of something unprecedented, members of an exclusive group who endured trials that validate their ongoing struggles. The very symptoms of trauma, the flashbacks and memory problems and difficulty with reality testing, become evidence supporting the conspiracy rather than simply symptoms requiring treatment. The community aspect of Montauk belief reinforces these psychological functions. Unlike earlier conspiracy theories that isolated believers, the Montauk phenomenon created networks of mutual reinforcement. Conferences brought together witnesses, researchers, and believers who validated each other's experiences. When someone expressed doubt about their memories, others reassured them that such doubt was itself evidence of programming, designed to make them question their own perceptions. This closed loop of mutual validation proved remarkably resistant to outside skepticism. These networks developed their own internal logic and hierarchy. Researchers gained status by uncovering new connections or recruiting new witnesses. Witnesses competed for authenticity, each story growing more elaborate in response to others. The community developed specialized language and shared reference points that marked insiders from outsiders. To question core elements of the narrative was to risk expulsion from the group, loss of this hard-won community and identity. The symbiotic relationship between conspiracy belief and popular culture further amplified the Montauk story's reach. The X-Files, which debuted in 1993, brought conspiracy thinking into primetime television. Its tagline, "The truth is out there," perfectly captured the epistemological stance of conspiracy culture. Reality exists, but official sources conceal it, requiring dedicated seekers to uncover it through alternative channels. The show's success demonstrated massive public appetite for narratives blending government conspiracy, paranormal phenomena, and the validation of believer protagonists proved correct despite institutional dismissal. Stranger Things, premiering in 2016, drew even more directly from Montauk mythology. Set in the 1980s, featuring a secret government facility conducting experiments on children with psychic abilities, creating portals to alternate dimensions, the show essentially dramatized core Montauk claims while filing off the conspiracy theory edges. The creators acknowledged the Montauk Project as inspiration, even initially titling the show Montauk before changing it during development. This transformation from fringe conspiracy to mainstream entertainment completed a curious circle: alleged fact-inspired fiction, which in turn reinforced belief in the original claims. This blurring of fiction and purported fact characterizes much modern conspiracy thinking. Believers point to fictional dramatizations as evidence that creators know hidden truths, embedding them in entertainment as a form of disclosure or warning. The entertainment industry's tendency to mine conspiracy theories for compelling narratives creates a feedback loop. Stories gain cultural currency through dramatization, which is then cited as validation by believers, which makes them more attractive to future creators, and the cycle continues. The psychological comfort of pattern finding also drives Montauk belief. Human brains evolved to detect patterns, often seeing connections where none exist, because the cost of missing a real pattern, a predator in the grass, a poisonous plant, historically outweighed the cost of false positives. Conspiracy theories offer an abundance of patterns to find. The Montauk narrative connects Cold War military projects, ancient occult practices, Nazi scientists, Native American sacred sites, electromagnetic phenomena, and contemporary missing persons cases into one grand unified theory. Each new connection provides a dopamine hit of understanding, the satisfaction of pieces clicking into place. This pattern seeking becomes self-reinforcing. Once you accept the basic premise, everything becomes potential evidence. A military helicopter flying overhead isn't routine training. It's surveillance. A gap in childhood memory isn't normal forgetting. It's proof of tampering. Strange dreams aren't simply the mind processing daily experience. They're suppressed memories breaking through programming. The theory becomes unfalsifiable, expanding to accommodate any evidence while dismissing contradictions as disinformation. The endurance of the Montauk narrative also reflects a fundamental human need to believe in the extraordinary. Despite centuries of scientific advancement revealing natural explanations for phenomena once attributed to gods or magic, many people resist a purely materialist worldview. The idea that reality contains only what we can measure and verify feels impoverished, insufficient to the complexity of human experience. Conspiracy theories like Montauk preserve space for the extraordinary, for phenomena beyond current scientific understanding, for a world more mysterious and meaningful than mainstream accounts acknowledge. This yearning takes on particular poignancy in our current era. As technology explains away mysteries and surveillance capitalism tracks our every click, as algorithms predict our behavior and social media reduces human complexity to data points, the Montauk story offers resistance. It insists that reality remains stranger than official sources admit, that consciousness possesses potentials beyond neurochemistry, that human experience cannot be fully captured by reductive framework. Understanding why people believe doesn't require dismissing their intelligence or sincerity. The psychological needs these narratives fulfill are genuine. The desire for meaning, for community, for special knowledge, for transformation of suffering into significance, these are deeply human drives. The Montauk Project narrative endures not because people are foolish, but because it speaks to real anxieties and authentic yearnings in ways that conventional frameworks often fail to address. It offers answers where official sources provide uncertainty, community where institutions breed isolation, and extraordinary purpose where daily life offers ordinary struggle. Standing before Camp Hero today, you might see nothing more sinister than families spreading picnic blankets on the grass, children racing between weathered bunkers, joggers following trails that wind past rusting radar towers. The air smells of salt and summer, not secrets. And yet, something lingers here. Something that refuses to settle into simple explanations or comfortable dismissals. The Montauk Project occupies a strange territory in our collective consciousness, suspended between documented history and modern mythology. We know with certainty that governments conducted unethical experiments on unwitting citizens. We know that intelligence agencies pursued mind control programs, dosing subjects with drugs, employing torture disguised as science. We know that military installations conducted research that would horrify the public, justified by national security and the logic of the Cold War. These aren't conspiracy theories. They're declassified facts, admissions wrung from agencies that spent decades denying everything. This verified legacy of deception creates fertile ground for stories like Montauk. When authorities have genuinely lied about subjecting citizens to radiation, to biological weapons, to psychological manipulation, why wouldn't they lie about other experiments? The trust has been broken not by paranoid fantasizing, but by actual betrayal. The Montauk narrative flourishes in soil poisoned by real government secrecy, watered by genuine historical trauma. Yet despite decades of investigation, despite thousands of pages of testimony, and countless hours of research, no physical evidence supports the specific claims about Montauk. No documents proving time travel experiments. No equipment designed for consciousness manipulation. No records of children brought to Camp Hero for psychic training. The radar tower remains just a radar tower, impressive in its engineering, but devoid of interdimensional portals. This absence of proof doesn't end the story. It merely transforms it. For those who believe they experienced Montauk, who carry memories of underground facilities and temporal manipulation, The lack of external validation doesn't erase their internal reality. Their memories feel real because, in a sense, they are real. The experience of remembering is genuine, even when the origin of those memories remains contested. This creates a profound puzzle about the nature of truth itself. Can something be psychologically true without being historically factual? Can we honor someone's lived experience while questioning whether the events they remember actually occurred? The Montauk story reveals how we navigate an age where distinguishing truth from fiction has become increasingly complex. We live in a time when healthy skepticism toward authority is not just reasonable but necessary, when questioning official narratives often proves more accurate than accepting them. Yet we also inhabit a landscape where unfalsifiable conspiracy thinking can spiral into territories that isolate rather than illuminate, that replace one form of blind faith with another. The line between these positions remains compellingly, troublingly blurred. The same critical thinking that helps us question government assurances can, taken too far, lead us to reject all consensus reality. The same openness to alternative explanations that reveals hidden truths can also make us vulnerable to stories that confirm our fears rather than challenge our understanding. Camp Hero today stands as a monument to this ambiguity. The ruins are real. The Cold War shadows are documented. But what happened in those shadows? What experiments might have been conducted in the spaces between official history and collective nightmare remains territory we can explore but never fully map. The families picnicking on the grass live comfortably with this uncertainty, perhaps because we all do now. We've learned to exist with shadows of secret history all around us, never quite sure where the actual darkness ends and our fear of darkness begins. That might be the truest legacy of the Montauk Project, whether it happened as described or not. It reminds us that in the modern age, truth itself has become a story we tell, retell, and struggle to verify in a world where the unthinkable has already been proven possible. That's where this journey ends for tonight. If you made it all the way here, subscribe and hit the bell for more long-form stories like this. Check out the videos on screen.